This is the Bowls of Life podcast. I'm Tyler.
And I'm Virginia. As we've gone through life, we've learned something important.
Life is messy. It gets complicated.
Oh, sorry.
Keep going.
Well, we've also learned that we can create tools to help us jump into the mess of life and make an adventure of it.
Welcome to our messy adventures of faith, family, and food. Hey, Virginia.
Hey.
You were asking if I had a banter piece?
Yeah. When do you have one?
No.
What's your guess on the baby due date coming?
Oh, 100% the worst day it could possibly happen. It will be the night of October 18th.
The night?
Yes. October 18th, the day before we open our new building for our church. On October 19th, you're going to just go ahead and go into labor on the 18th on me.
Oh, so you're saying I'm going to go into labor on the 18th?
Yes, that is literally my words.
Yeah.
Yes, the worst.
I thought you said the night of the 19th.
No, the night of the 18th.
Gotcha. Yeah. I don't think that'll happen.
You are.
I think it'll be like...
The high stress of it all is just going to force the baby out of you.
I think it'll be the 19th or the 20th.
Yeah, that feels more realistic.
We're going to go hard on Sunday morning in the new building. We're going to come home and we're going to relax. And then I'm going to go into labor.
Yeah. Are we actually going to relax, or are our kids going to be super overstimulated from the whole new environment and all the things, and we in no way relax at all?
Yeah, I actually had the fear oh no, we're going to be so exhausted.
Or that. Yeah. No.
So maybe the 20th.
Yeah. It's totally possible.
Yeah, I mean, as soon as possible, but not
is your
before
preference?
Then. Yeah.
Yeah. As soon as possible is your preference. Understandable.
As soon as safely possible.
You do look like an exercise ball, so.
My belly does.
Yes. Yes, exactly.
It is large and in charge.
I mean, I guess it's in charge. It does limit you in many ways.
It is
currently,
very much in charge.
Yeah, that makes sense. Fair enough.
Luna today, as we're picking up some toys, she's like, "Mom, it hurts when I bend over." I was like,
and you pushed her down.
I really wanted to be like, no. And I told her, I was like, well, I hurt every time I bend over. And I came in here to actually help. And I was like, no, Luna, it really hurts me to bend over. She was like, it does me too. I was like, no. You don't understand.
You're complaining about picking up like you always do.
I'm like, I can't bend over anymore. It hurts so bad. Anyways, what are we talking about tonight?
We are in a series called Creeds, Confessions, and Catechisms, walking through some really big, important documents of church history. So far, we've talked about the Apostles' Creed, which is basic Christian beliefs. Then we talked about the Nicene Creed, which is probably the most well-known of all of these things, maybe the Nicene Creed. Mm-hmm. It's right beside Apostles, I'd lean Nicene. Anyway, the biggest thing there is that Jesus is fully God and fully man. He's the same as God the Father. Then we talked about the Chalcedonian definition, and that one was focused on how Jesus can be both divine and human in one person, followed by the Athanasian Creed. And this one was the most detailed of all the creeds, the Chalcedonian definition being a creed, even though it's called a definition.
Right.
But anyway, so the Athanasian Creed, it was a very detailed explanation of the Trinity, of all things about Jesus, and how early Christians, and it shows how early Christians use very precise language to protect gospel truths.
Cool.
It was my first experience with the Athanasian Creed, and I really liked it.
Mm-hmm.
I was a huge fan, and am still. Then we got into Confessions on our last episode. Not Nellie's, but instead we started talking about the Augsburg Confession.
Oh, yeah, we've already done one. I'm sorry, I totally forgot about it.
That's okay. So the Augsburg Confession was essentially the core document of Lutheranism.
Yes, which is how we talked a lot about the Reformation.
Yes, it's what got us into the Reformation. So it's really the first super duper important document from the Reformation era, outside of technically Luther's 95 Theses, but we don't no church is really looking at those in the way churches do still hold to the confessions, where the theses were 95 things he wanted to reform about the church. The confessions are the statement of beliefs of the church.
Okay.
So Augsburg Confession, first big important document for the Reformation era. The one we are jumping into tonight is the Westminster Confession, which is the most well-known
I had no idea.
Reformation era
All right.
documents.
Yeah, because we've talked about that.
Yes, we have.
Well, I mean, you've mentioned it either here in real life and on the podcast.
Fair enough. Okay. So Augsburg was kind of kicked off in the 1530s and got fully implemented by the mid 1540s. We're actually going to jump forward. So we were in Germany in the 1530s. We're jumping over to England in the 1640s. So we're jumping forward a century.
Okay.
And moving from Germany to England. Reformation theology has spread pretty much across all of Europe, and it's created a lot of new questions and conflicts. Some of those big questions, they're starting to go beyond how are we saved, and now it's more about how should the church be organized and who has the authority in the church. People literally fought civil wars over these answers, and we'll talk about that some tonight. There's a lot of issues of politics and religion intertwined, which has been the case with just about all of these episodes that we've talked about. Outside of the Apostles' Creed, it's probably the only one that didn't really have a political angle around it.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah, so, and then we're going to talk a little bit about why the Westminster Confession matters. And go, you're about to say something.
I was just about to make a comment. So you're saying that church and politics has never been separated?
It never has been and never really will be, because you can't separate elements of life that are just life. Politics is literally it's the running of the city is basically what the Latin phrase meant. It was the I think organizing is actually the proper word. The organizing of city life. That's what politics is. AKA it's the organizing of your life with the people who live around you.
Yeah.
Yeah, your faith comes into play in that.
Yeah.
Yes. It's just a larger conversation of what that is actually meant to look like is where the difficulties of that conversation.
The larger the city, quote unquote city that you're politicking.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
So before we jump into, we've been kicking off with histories to get us ready for all of this. Before we do that, I'm going to give us 3 church government terms before we start, because these will matter through the conversation a bit at various points. So basically, these are 3 different styles of how to organize a church structure, meaning think denominational.
Right.
So from the bottom all the way up and from the up all the way down. So first one is Episcopal, which you're probably familiar with from the Episcopal Church as far as just knowing the term exists. But what does it mean? So essentially in an Episcopal government style, it's that authority is hierarchical, aka it comes from top down.
Okay.
So bishops, who are most often appointed, and depending on who's in charge of this Episcopal Church, governance means who's appointing these bishops. In this time period we're talking about, it's going to be your monarchies that are appointing the bishops or people of that nature.
Okay.
Or if you're in the Catholic system, it's the Pope and cardinals appointing them. So bishops then will appoint people below them, but they're overseeing the priests or the pastors, as we would say, and they're overseeing the congregations. So your local church is run by someone who was put in place by a bishop, and that's not necessarily a bad thing unless you start questioning, well, who put the bishop in charge and why? And that's where some of the tension points will come as we talk through this history, is best friend appointee kind of things. So this functions kind of like a monarchy, an empire. Authority flows down from the top. Presbyterian church government, which again you would know of the Presbyterian Church, but why is it called that? So churches are led by elders. So individual churches are led by elders that are chosen by the congregation, but those elders are also connected to a regional assembly, a presbytery, that shares authority in bigger decisions and keeps the local elders accountable. So there's up and down authority going on here. So local churches are voting up their leaders, then their leaders are connected to the larger body of church leaders from other churches, and within them there are structures of authority where they're kind of voting on who's in charge of them and vice versa.
Okay.
So I think a true republic, no, the U.S. is not a republic. We're a representative democracy. We're not even a true democracy. But a republic is where authority is shared through elected representatives.
Okay.
We're more a republic than a democracy, despite the fact that we use the word democracy. Fun facts. Yeah. And then there's Congregationalists. And so authority here rests in the local congregation. They're autonomous and they're self-governing. So the church itself votes on anything and everything, and they put their pastor/leaders in charge, but they're actually the ones holding their pastor/leaders accountable and can kick them to the curb as well.
Okay.
That's more like a direct democracy because authority is held by the people themselves. It's fully held there. We're a representative democracy where we elect representatives to represent us. So
you're talking about in U.S. politics,
yes.
Okay, but these three, Episcopal, Presbyterian, and Congregationalist, are three types of church governments.
Governance, yes, government systems, however you want to say it. Yes, and so...
At this time.
Yes, and a lot of the tension and turmoil that's going on in that time period is based on which one of these should be the standard, basically. And these are still technically the three systems. Now, they're not just nice and neat, and like our church would sort of be a Congregationalist, but sort of is also Presbyterian-ish, and
there's crossover.
Yeah,
I see.
It's not overly clear on all the lines, but yes, that's kind of where all the big sticking points are here.
Okay, cool.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about what all's been going on. So Luther's ideas have spread. I like the phrase, it was a Protestant contagion, despite the fact that Henry VIII initially writes letters and all kinds of things, like denouncing Henry Tudor Henry VIII.
Yeah.
He's denouncing all this Protestant nonsense when he can't divorce, I believe it was Mary was her name. No,
Catherine.
She wasn't a Catherine. Okay. So he can't divorce Catherine, whose daughter is Mary.
Yes.
He then starts listening to some Protestant voices around him and basically creates the Church of England. And it's got a lot going on there. So that's in 1534 where he creates the Church of England. It's literally, it wasn't for theological purposes.
Right.
It just wasn't. It was for personal purposes.
Yeah.
I'm sure the voices around him that were encouraging him in that direction, there was probably plenty of theological conviction for several of those voices.
Uh-huh.
But for Henry, it was about this divorce. It just, if you look at his life, it's pretty clear.
Yeah, because he married his brother's wife. His brother died, right? Wasn't that it?
Is that where Catherine comes in?
Yeah,
okay,
so Catherine of Aragon was married to his brother.
Yep.
And brother died, so followed the biblical...
And he is obligated to marry her.
To marry Catherine of Aragon. And she was actually a really strong...
Catholic.
Well, yeah, she was a strong Catholic, but the point I was trying to make, she was a strong, connection to her. I think she was from Spain. It was of Aragon, so Spain area,
I believe. Yeah.
So it was a good, like, what's the word I'm looking for? Ally connection.
Yes.
But he, like, I don't know.
He ain't like her.
He didn't like her. So
he just didn't.
He didn't want to be married to her anymore. And so he tried to, like, use the Bible, other things in the Bible to say I shouldn't be married to her and whatever.
Ultimately, there was some back and forth in the process of the creation of the Church of England, but ultimately he wanted to set himself up as the English Pope. I mean, that's really what his goal was. He didn't really care that much about having very much reform in the church itself. The Church of England was very Catholic in the way it operated and many of the things it did. And so he created a different Catholic church, basically. So that's what he does. Well, Henry dies, and his son, Edward the Sixth, becomes king. He's a boy king, and he only lives, is king, for about 6 years there. And so he's got a lot of Protestant advisors around him, so they're pushing him to make some genuine Reformation theology happen. The Book of Common Prayer is created under Edward the Sixth there. The Book of Common Prayer that still exists and operates in churches today.
When you say it was created under Edward,
is under his kingship.
Okay.
But it was really, I can't remember exactly who was the original author of it offhand, but it was because of his advisors that it was created. So it's the book of liturgy that outlines what church is going to look like, and there's some devotional type elements to it as well. So it's not just for Sundays, it also has some things throughout your week.
So pause, because we went too fast past Henry.
Oh, you want to talk about Henry more?
Yeah.
Okay,
because we mentioned him a few podcast episodes back, 1 or 2 or 3, I don't know. And you were like, oh yeah, he had like 2 or 3 wives, and I was like, no, I'm pretty sure it was like 5, 6, 7, 8 or something. But I looked it up; it was 6.
Was it that many?
It's 6 wives,
and
some of them were like, he was married to Catherine Aragon the longest, but some of them were like months. Within like months, less than a year, and 3 of them were named Catherine, which is the funniest thing too. But that's just because Catholics name their kids like the same names.
Yeah, I only remember 5 from the TV show. I'm trying to recount them in my head.
Yeah, I don't know if they ever got to the actual 6th one, but yeah, he had 6 wives.
How interesting. And
so he went through all of that to divorce from Catherine of Aragon in order to marry somebody he thought was...
It was Anne Boleyn was number 2, right?
Anne Boleyn. Yeah. And then he had Jane... He fell in love with Jane Seymour. And then there was Anaclees, who was like literally less than... It was within the same year. So it was just a few months. Yeah. So he's now got the permission to divorce, and he doesn't
need permission. He's the English Pope, essentially.
Right. Well, and he beheads Anne Boleyn.
Yeah, he does, because he accuses her of cheating on him. Whether or not she did, who knows?
Right.
Probably
Anyways,
not.
cray. But I wanted to, because we had talked about that, I wanted to make sure I said, that he had 6 wives.
That's fair. Edward is his son by, I believe, his last marriage.
Yeah, because... that was it. Catherine never could provide him a son.
Yeah, that was part of the issue. You're right. I'd forgotten about that.
She gave him, like, she had Mary and then never got pregnant, I think, after that. But
yep, that's accurate. Yep.
And then Elizabeth was Anne
Boleyn.
Anne Boleyn. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. So, Edward, his last kid, but his only son, becomes king, because that's how it works.
Right.
And yes, it was under him that Book of Common Prayer happens, and so a lot of Protestant Reformation, and I think Thomas Cranmer was behind the Book of Common Prayer as well. So he was like the lead advisor for Edward, who was helping push all this Protestant stuff, and so... I think he was kind of behind the Book of Common Prayer. Now I'm seeing his name and reconnecting those dots.
Yeah.
If I remember right, at least from the TV show, Edward's mom was fairly Protestant as well, and that probably played a factor in him being fairly Protestant. So Edward dies.
And the show was, a little...
Oh, I mean, it's drama. Yeah.
Right, it's drama.
Yeah. He dies fairly young. His oldest sister, Mary I, Catherine's daughter, becomes queen, and she has lived through all of her dad's chaos. She is staunchly Catholic. The show didn't do justice of making her angry enough to be who she grew up to be. Because she is Bloody Mary. Yeah. She violently restored Catholicism to England and assumably Ireland and not Scotland. We hadn't gotten Scotland roped into all this yet. That's under James. We'll get there. She violently restores it because she burns some 280 Protestant leaders alive. Burns them alive. Her persecution, though, because this has been true through church history, when there's persecution, it actually strengthens the church.
Fair.
And that's what this persecution did for Protestant resolve. And so it created a lot of inspiring martyrs and a lot of people who were willing to fight for their faith. So when Mary dies, 5 years into her reign, she dies, and so there's just one Tudor kid left. It's Elizabeth I, and she is the daughter of Anne Boleyn, his second wife. And so she is actually queen for about almost 50 years, and she is responsible for the Elizabethan. Say it.
Elizabethan?
Sure, okay. It just felt weird. Yeah. Elizabethan settlement. Basically, she tries to find the middle ground to satisfy most people. And so she is trying to find that middle ground between Catholicism and the Protestant version of the Church of England. And so her one issue really is that she tended to prioritize political stability over theological consistency, which did create some long-term problems.
And she refused to get married, right?
I have no idea. I do know she had no kids, so probably that feels accurate.
She,
Yeah, that one I'm not sure about. Basically, under her, the Church of England was structured similar to the Catholic Church, where they kept bishops and the real traditional hierarchy, but they did allow a lot of Protestant doctrine. And again, as we've said in the series several times, these kind of compromises ultimately don't satisfy anybody. The people who were staunchly Catholic were like, nope, this theology doesn't work for me. And the people who were really Protestant were like, nope, this governance structure doesn't work for me. And so they're all just unsatisfied. She did institute the Book of Common Prayer because Mary had kicked it to the curb because it wasn't Catholic. And it was actually under her that this really got its full legs. It became a really beautiful English liturgy. The one downside of it is that it still tended to avoid any controversial theological statements because she was trying to, again, bridge the gap and satisfy everybody, and it just, again, frustrated especially the Protestants because they wanted a lot more clear biblical teaching going on than what was happening through the Book of Common Prayer. So it was under her that a group called the Puritans came into play. Okay. It's a phrase you're probably familiar with. A lot of Puritans were ones who came over as early American settlers.
Is that what they called the Quakers?
They're tied in with this.
Okay.
It's I don't know enough about Quakers to know where the breaks are, but they're of a similar nature.
Yeah.
Yes.
So the Puritans were the first to come to America?
They were in those first groups.
Some of
the early settlers tended to be Puritans. After they couldn't get their way to reform the church, many of them would just choose to leave and start over in America.
And so what did they want?
So they wanted to purify the church by eliminating any remaining Catholic elements, basically.
Okay.
And so they weren't separatists initially. That's the thing, is the early Puritans really did want to purify the church. That's where it starts. But then they become separatists because they never really got what they were looking for.
Puritans and Quakers are separate.
Okay. There you go.
For my quick Google search.
I was pretty confident they were. I think they have similar.
They did have something with the Church of
backgrounds,
England that they wanted to change.
Yes.
Maybe that's their similarity.
Yeah. But ultimately, the Puritan vision was to just get rid of bishops, all the fancy ceremonies, and set prayer in favor of just like simplified worship. They looked towards John Calvin's Geneva. Geneva under John Calvin was a just Reformation central piece, and the city governed itself through the church, and it was a cool study piece. It's not easily repeated anywhere else, but they liked Calvin's Geneva. They also liked John Knox's Scotland at this time. It was similar but very different to Calvin's Geneva, where it's being run government politics is being run a lot through the church and the church structure system because they are so intertwined. Ultimately, that Scotland system, it proved that effective church governance didn't require this hierarchy of bishops and all this upstream stuff where all these appointees were going on, but instead you could still have enough structure to have accountability over your individual local churches. That's always the struggle, especially in this time period with people going full-on Congregationalist, is they have fear of no accountability for individual churches and those individual church leaders, which is a real thing,
right?
In our modern day just as much as then.
Yeah, absolutely. I was like, this like the same problems we're having today.
Absolutely. And so that tension that's going on in England at this point between traditional and liturgical worship and more contemporary simple worship, I mean, that is also a thing today.
Yeah.
It's like, how are we doing this? And, you know, fill in your version of traditional however you want and your version of contemporary however you want. It's still a tension piece in just about every church, even new churches.
Yeah, and it's definitely like, it's a way that we describe churches.
Yeah.
Like, oh, it's a little bit more
More
traditional,
a
or
little
it's
more
like,
contemporary.
it's a little more contemporary.
Yep.
It's like, it's really contemporary, or it's really traditional.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, Henry VIII, he breaks off. I'm giving us a shift back real quick. He broke off back in 1534. So, that's when Church of England is basically created, 1534.
Okay.
So, we are now up to 1603.
Okay.
All right. And this brings us to King James.
James.
That King James.
Yeah, you get to learn about him.
Yes. So
the holy of all holy versions of the Bible.
Yeah, the most bestest.
Right.
According to some. Anyway, so King James.
Most accurate.
He is not of the Tudor line because, as you said, Elizabeth
didn't have any children.
Yeah, she definitely didn't have any children. We think she didn't marry.
I think she married.
I'm taking your word for that one. He is a great-grandchild of Henry VII. He is the son of Mary, Queen of Scots. So he is the King of Scotland.
So Mary, Queen of Scots is not the same as Bloody Mary.
Correct.
Yeah. So the TV show Reign. Sorry,
yes.
I've watched lots of dumb shows.
Medieval shows, yes.
That's right, because she's the cousin of Elizabeth.
Correct.
Mary, Queen of Scots. So she's King James' mother. And her father is Henry VII.
No.
No?
Not her father.
Sorry.
It'd be her it's a
Sorry,
kind of disconnect there. It's not a direct lineage, but he is the most direct of very royal status at the same time. Okay. There are probably some who are technically more directly connected to Elizabeth I, but he's the one who is both connected to that family lineage and is of a very royal status all by himself.
Yeah.
And so he's able to be given / take that throne.
Yeah.
So he is already King of Scotland, the Scots, and he then becomes the King of England. And for quite a long time, it was like Henry VI, I believe, who became King of Ireland. So King James was the King of Scotland, England, and Ireland. He's king of 3 nations
Right.
at the same time. And he's got a really big issue in front of him. All 3 of these nations, they maintain very different religious beliefs under Christianity umbrella.
Yeah.
For England, it's Protestant bishops. For Scotland, it's presbyteries. And for Ireland, they're still Catholic. And so King James is looking around and going, oh no, what do I do? Now, for King James, he does recognize that if there are no bishops, there's really no king.
Yeah.
Because the king draws plenty of his power through religious authority. And if you can't just be appointing people to be in charge of things, that means maybe you can't appoint a king to be in charge of things either. And oh no, if there's just like the people have the power in the church, does that mean the people should also have the power in our country's government? And so he recognizes the difficulty of the presbyteries and the Congregationalists, not that he's necessarily having to deal with those as directly, but he recognizes the issues going on in his Scotland, and he's recognizing that there's plenty of people who want to be Protestant, so he's probably most drawn to the English system himself. And so he's kind of looking through all of this and just going, okay, what do I do? Well, he starts to try and institute more of the English style of church governance over into Scotland, and they didn't like it. No, they didn't play. The Presbyterians consistently fought his attempts to impose bishops in Anglican worship, and so it was just always this tension between his desire for uniformity and this hard Scottish determination to maintain a reformed system. And I'm not sure he really even stepped into the Catholic side of Ireland. I think he recognized, I'm not going to change it because they got bishops and it's close enough for me, kind of thing. So James dies after just over 20 years of being king, and his son Charles I becomes king.
Is this Bonnie Charles? What they call him?
I have no idea.
This
is Charles the First.
No, it's not him.
It's the son of King James.
I think he's in the 1700s.
Okay, yeah, I got nothing.
I keep trying to get Bonnie Charles in there, or whatever his name is.
I have no idea who this person is you're referencing.
It's not him yet.
But Charles is just one big old problem. He is the problem of problems, actually.
Okay.
So he escalates everything. He's really aggressive, where his dad was kind of subtle and tried to do things calmly. He was really determined to achieve religious uniformity across all of his kingdoms. And because he's just like a bull in a china shop, it literally breaks the nations.
Yeah.
So he thought, and any religious diversity was a threat to his kingship. He actually refused to call Parliament for 11 years. That's the people's representatives in England. He wouldn't call Parliament to session for 11 years because he felt that he had divine right of kings, which was a whole thing basically that meant that kings ruled by God's will, not the people's will, and therefore he didn't need to listen to the people, aka he didn't need to listen to Parliament, who represented the people. So he just refuses to call that part of government to session, and they can't officially meet and do anything without the king's approval, because this is an empire, it isn't a monarch. So what power they do have is still under his authority. And so he appoints a guy as the Archbishop of Canterbury, which is the highest position in the Church of England short of the king themselves. He appoints William Laud, and so William Laud will push a lot of high church practices that looked very Catholic to Protestant people. He liked really festive, fancy vestments, aka the clothes they wear. He was a big fan of altar rails and formal ceremonies and just all the things that Protestants thought were wrong with the operation of a church gathering, he was like, I like those things. Okay. And so he's shoving those into the Church of England, and he is not chill about it at all. He also is a bull in a china shop.
Okay. Archbishop.
Yep.
William Laud. Okay.
William Laud. And so all these changes just basically reversed all of the English Reformation, and it's just basically pushing everything back to a papal kind of system. And so he is
papal?
Catholic, Pope.
Okay.
And so he's Charles' right-hand man in enforcing all religious conformity, and his crackdown on any dissent was so hard, it's so rough, that it's actually what turned much of the kingdom against the king. So Charles is a bull in a china shop, but William Laud is is just like two bulls in a china shop, causing double the chaos.
Okay.
And so finally the Scots had enough.
Yeah.
And so come 1637, they explode. They actually attempt to force the English when William Laud attempts to force the English Common Book of Prayer onto them, they just refuse to have it. There's all kinds of resistance. There's riots. They view this as an attack on their religious freedom and their ability to have a Protestant style church, and so they won't have it. And literally war is breaking out, with all like minor wars are breaking out in Scotland that Charles is having to go and deal with. But the problem is he's failing miserably in his war against Scotland, against these Scottish people, and he runs out of money because wars cost money. Yeah. And the only people who can give him more money, at least within his own government, is Parliament. Right. So after 11 years, he finally has to call a session of Parliament. And this is just ultimately the beginning of his downfall, was calling Parliament. So what happens after 11 years of pent-up frustration? 1640, he calls them to session, and they've got all of these grievances that have not been resolved. And so they arrive determined to address every fundamental constitutional issue that Charles has violated, because there are things that he as king is technically not able to do, and he has just been doing them left and right. They also have a lot of religious issues that they want addressed, and a lot of these are things that Archbishop Laud had just caused himself. And so they're not actually all that focused on showing up to give him money. They want to talk about the issues. And so all of these interconnected crises are going on, where political and religious power and authority are just crashing into each other. They can't be separated because the king controls both, and Parliament's looking and realizing they can't limit Charles's politics without fully reforming the church system that is supporting his monarchy. And so those who are in Parliament who want a lot of church reformation, they actually start to view this as God's opportunity for them to reform the Church of England, to really get a true Reformation Protestant style church going, instead of Catholic light that they felt the Anglican Church of England was at that time.
Okay.
And so they actually kind of view Charles's failures as divine judgments on the fact that the church is still, at this point, only half reformed in their minds. And so in 1642, 2 years after he calls Parliament to session, civil war finally breaks out. Okay. Because Charles attempted to arrest some parliamentary leaders, and because that doesn't happen, peaceful resolution is now just off the table. England itself is in civil war. So Charles has been at war in Scotland, which he leads, but now England itself is also in a civil war. And so it's just not good for him. And so they're all both sides start preparing their militaries for like full-on war, not just little skirmishes and protest riots here and there, but like we're getting ready for war. And at the same time, they're both going, yeah, we're definitely not going to fight the monarchy. And the monarchy's like, yeah, I'm definitely not going to fight my own parliament. But everybody knows what's coming. So they start getting ready. And so the Civil War is political, but it's a religious war in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And so the Royalists, also known as the Cavaliers, was the military people who were loyal to Charles. They defended having bishops and traditional worship. The Parliamentarians, or otherwise known as Roundheads, I think it had something to do with a garment they wore.
Okay.
Helmet kind of thing. They're led by a guy, general by the name of Oliver Cromwell. That name will be important in a minute. So the Parliamentarians, they demanded Reformation church government as they felt the Bible mandated. And so these competing visions of what God required for English Christianity was really the root behind everything else going on at this point. And Parliament recognized something. They knew they didn't actually have the military power to stand up to Charles. And so they said, okay, we know who also hates Charles. The Scots. And so they're like, all right, so Scots, y'all want to be our bestie friends? And the Scots said, yeah, sure. With a lot of religious concessions, we might consider it.
Okay.
And that is what gets us to our desperate bargain, where England promises to reform religion according to God's word for Scottish military help. And this vague language seems safe to the English negotiators, but to the Scots, they heard, oh, you're going to adopt the Presbyterian system that we have in place. And so this different expectation starts to create some tension even just right off the bat. And so before they can even really get into these wars and all the things are going on, Parliament's over here going, if we just promise a little bit and don't lean in too hard, and then finally they have to go, okay, no, we've got to call some kind of official thing to some kind of official meeting of people, and they're going to put together some official documents of what we're saying and see if you guys are on board for it. So that is when the Westminster Assembly was called.
All right.
So we got to Westminster. Basically, Parliament needed some authoritative documents to justify what was going to happen and guide the implementation of it. They couldn't just declare new policies without a lot of biblical backing, and that was going to require a lot of thought and study to create. And they needed this to satisfy both the English and the Scottish expectations. And so that's where Westminster begins. Now, Westminster itself is a church abbey that was very influential, and that's just the place they met at, essentially.
Okay.
And so we're going to take us a quick ad break after all that history, and then we'll jump into Westminster itself. All right. So the Westminster Assembly, let's talk about who was there. There were 121 carefully chosen ministers who were mostly Puritan theologians.
Okay.
But they weren't radical separatists. They were selected by Parliament for serious Reformed scholarship. And the goal was reforming the national church from within, not destroying it. There were also 30 parliamentarian observers. These are politicians who were there to ensure that the theologians stayed focused on the practical needs rather than just getting lost in academic debates, which, fair. But also, these laymen represented civil authority, and they were supposed to implement whatever each of the 121, they were referred to as divines. Okay. That was kind of their title. Don't ask me why. But these 30 parliamentarians were there to make sure they could implement whatever was decided. And, they're also there trying to sway it for political purposes too. But, whatever. There was also some Scottish commissioners. There were 4 theologians plus 7 politicians from Scotland. With advisory roles that carried a lot of influence. Despite the fact that they were just advisors, they were carrying a lot of influence because they represented what a successful Presbyterian system looked like. And so they're pushing for those kind of reforms because they're going, hey guys, we know how to make this church government structure work. Please listen to us. Mm-hmm. And in a lot of ways they did. So basically, here's what would happen. Westminster Abbey, it's the chapel of Henry VII, or they met in the Henry VII chapel that's named after him there at the Abbey. It's later called the Jerusalem Chamber. Don't ask me why, but this setting was a reminder that they're not focused on just what has recently happened, but they're connecting back to a couple centuries back worth of tradition. So we're trying to go back to Scripture and make sure we're getting what's true from the past, not just what we want in this present moment. Yeah. And so basically in the morning, the committees would prepare their proposals, and in the afternoons they would debate and vote on final language for whatever the topic of the probably more week than just day was. And so this gave some good time for consideration, but it also was helping, this daily schedule was helping maintain that steady progress was going forward, that we're not just getting lost in our endless debates over and over, and we're just going to debate this thing until it's all done. It's like, no. In the morning you prep, in the afternoon we debate, and by the evening we are going to have some form of a decision, whether that decision is just like, hey, this is where we are, we need to think about it more and pick it back up tomorrow. That can be the decision, but it's not, hey, we're just going to keep debating this for the next week and that's all we do until we get done. They had to vote on everything. It required a majority, but when there was a minority when the minority group was very adamant, they were actually pretty good to go back to the table and listen again. Okay. So if like a couple of people are dissenting, whatever, we're going forward with this. But if a third of them are still like, no, you're not listening, you're not understanding what we're saying, then they just had an understanding that they go, okay, despite the fact that we could technically approve this, let's slow down and keep talking about it. Which I think is part of why it became such a great document, because they did things like that. They, had dialogue and listened to each other.
They listened and they didn't call people names.
How wild.
Incite violence.
So yeah, they preferred unity over speed. They know they've got the job and they've got to get it moving, but they wanted to make sure that a widely supported document would have greater authority and would be more likely to be adopted. So they were willing to go a little slower when they needed to, which is cool. Every decision they made required scriptural support with specific citations, and so the document itself was super dense with a lot of biblical references.
That's cool. How long did it take?
We're getting there.
Okay.
We'll run a quick timeline of it in just a minute. The divines, they basically wanted to make sure all of this was on unshakable foundation that would withstand intense scrutiny from multiple perspectives.
How fun.
Yeah, and so it's really cool. There was a guy by the name of William Twiss, or Twissy.
Twiss?
Twiss, sure. He was the moderator over the entire thing, and so he was a known theologian, and so it gave a lot of authority to what was happening, that he was kind of the main moderator of it. And some of those Scottish guys we were referencing, these names don't overly matter, but there was a couple of them that were really stout theologians in the Scottish world, and so they're also there. They're some of those advisors speaking into it. So some of those key personalities, just again, they're giving a lot of weight to what's going on. Mm-hmm. There's also a group known as the dissenting brethren. Thomas Goodwin and a couple other of his colleagues, they were actually arguing for a congregational rather than a Presbyterian church government. And though they were small, they did represent a growing English preference for local autonomy over denominational control. And it makes sense in the English world where they've been forever under this monarchy, where they're just looking around and going, we just want to be able to live our lives and do church the way that makes sense for us. and we just really don't want someone who doesn't live here or some bishop over half the country leaning in and telling us what we should and shouldn't do. And so the dissenting brethren, they're continually they're pushing towards a congregational view of life or view of church. And so they feared that the Presbyterian assembly would essentially become bishops who could just do and say what they wanted. And they just felt like the Reformation demanded a spiritual freedom that the Presbytery didn't give. There were also some who wanted a lot of state control over church discipline, but there were others who were like, no, the church needs to be completely independent from the government. And that was a lot of the fundamental disagreements that went on had to do with how connected the political system could be to the church government system.
Yeah.
That was a big thing that was going on. And so they're dealing with all of that, all of these political needs, Parliament out here pushing for all kinds of modifications that would make their job easier, and the divines are over here going, yeah, no, but that's not biblical, and that model isn't actually what's here. And so they've got all these pressures going on them, and yet they managed to still hold majority theological integrity. I would say 100% until some things a little down the road came along, but especially in their original document, they had integrity in what they were doing and saying without a lot of political motivation behind it.
Nice.
They did a good job of that, and so they were often divided between precise and flexible language because they wanted to make sure that they were being very theologically and biblically accurate, and so they want to use precise language, but then they were also trying to leave just enough ambiguity where there was some freedom on certain topics to have a different view on what I would call second and third tier topics.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so they got all of that going on along the way. So you asked for a timeline. I've made sure I had a succinct timeline for us. So all of this starts in 1643, and the first year-ish of the Westminster Assembly was basically debating which church government system to go with. So for a year, they're debating, are we Episcopal? They really aren't debating that one much. They're basically debating Presbyterian and Congregationalist.
Okay.
Church government. So that's like a whole year worth of it.
Wow.
Then they finally start working on writing the confession in late 1644, and that takes almost 2 full years for them to do that. So they're working through systematic theology covering all major Christian doctrines, and so it's a very precise work. They take a lot of time, they're careful with it, and they've got all these extensive biblical references being compiled together, and they're debating over, again, that kind of language they're using through this. So it's a 2-year process to write it all down. They ultimately completed it and submitted it to Parliament in December of 1646.
So how many years is that now?
So they started in 43, and
so
they
3
submit
years.
the document in the end of 46. So yeah, almost 3 full years. So once Parliament gets their hands on it, they actually request the addition of all the scripture citations to support each doctrinal statement. So the document they submitted, it's got some of those references, but they don't submit a document with literally every single biblical reference that they have compiled. Mm-hmm. But Parliament requests it, and honestly, it's most likely because they were probably hoping to undermine some of the sections that they didn't like, and so they were hoping that they would come back with so few biblical references for those sections that they could be like, look, you're playing semantics here. Actually, it could be this. But
interpretation differences, I guess.
Yep. So after all the scripture proofs are added and they get all of that done, the Parliament will approve it. Let's see, I'm trying to check my dates here. Oh, so they get all the stuff to Parliament by April of 1648. So another year and a half
Yes.
of work they put in.
I was about to say, I feel like that would take a long time unless they just already had
it all together. Yeah, no, I guess they didn't yet. And so they send all of this. This is a huge document with all this biblical citations in there, explicitly explaining each theological claim. And so Parliament will ultimately approve the Westminster Confession in June 20 of 1648.
Okay.
So they started in 43 and it gets approved in 48. Now they approve it with revisions to the chapters on church discipline, on church assemblies, and on marriage. And
that's what they approve.
Yes, they made some revisions on those three sections: church discipline, church assemblies, and marriage.
Okay.
So all of this, for the most part, everything in the Westminster Confession, from a theological doctrinal stand, was so biblically sound that Parliament recognized it, and they recognized that the divine scholarly work and their needed theological justifications were good. That was never the question. It was always political resistance. Many members of Parliament preferred a congregational government over a Presbyterian hierarchy, so they feared that there would just be new religious tyranny. Again, some of the same thing the Congregationalists were worried about, who were a part of the creation of it. Their selective implementation of it, modifying a few little bits around government and things like that, it was just a reflection, again, of that tension between religious ideas and political necessities during wartime. Parliament's basically making concessions around things they feel they'll need to be able to lead as a government, more than they're thinking about the theological issues. The fun part is that the Scottish people actually fully accepted it, unedited in anything, back in 1647, like a full year before England fully accepts it and approves it. Like, they saw it, they read it, and they were like, yes, we love it. They were fully satisfied with Westminster's work. And man, if that isn't a reminder that making decisions in church world is hard. There's a balancing act between everything, honestly, but theological expertise, having enough input from people around you, making sure it is biblically sound, making sure it does make sense practically, like all the things, like that hasn't gotten easier in a lot of ways. Yeah. So, that is how the Westminster Confession became what it is.
Okay.
Let's talk about what's in it for a minute.
Yeah, I just looked it up. It was 74 pages.
Yeah, no, it's super long. Yeah, so we're obviously not talking about all of it by any stretch. I mean, it is a dense document. Yeah. And reading it isn't easy.
Have you read any of it?
Parts of it? I have listened and read to parts of it.
Okay.
I need to click play and just listen to the entirety of it, but I just have not actually had time before this episode got started. I'm actually sad I didn't get it fully listened to before we started, but I've got parts of it. Okay. So none of this is going to, very little of this will be rubbing or new to you and people who've grown up in similar Baptist, Protestant kind of angles. A lot of it will sound similar to some of the things we talked about on the last episode with Lutheranism. Not all of it, but plenty of it. So we're just going to hit it quick. And anywhere you want to ask questions or talk about further, just do that.
Let's go. I'm tired.
Yep. That's okay. Chapter 1 is about the Bible's ultimate authority. This is Reformation 101. Sola Scriptura. Through Scripture alone, the Bible is the authority. It's not about church leaders and church tradition, things like that. It's like, no. If you can't find it in Scripture, like, that ain't it. Yeah. We're turning to the Bible for ultimate authority in all things. And one of the big things that really does is it enables every believer to access God's truth directly through reading the Bible and praying, rather than having to depend on clergy and trusting that the clergy is actually telling you truth. And so it's a huge deal. They talked a lot about covenant theology. They made it simple. Basically, the original plan was that Adam could have earned, I don't know that that's quite the way I would say it, and I'm not sure that's the exact verbiage that's in the document itself, but we're rolling with it for this moment.
Okay.
That Adam would have eternal life because he was perfectly obedient, but when he failed, all humanity became guilty alongside him. Had he been perfectly obedient, it would have been obvious that in God's justice that he would continue to live that eternal life, but because of his failure to be obedient, God's justice requires death in a lot of ways. Okay. His righteousness demands that the guilt be met. Okay. The payment for guilt be met. So God's solution is a covenant of grace. That's where the name comes from, of covenant theology. A covenant of grace through Christ's perfect work instead of human effort. It's a completely different basis for salvation, where believers can receive credit for Jesus' righteousness rather than being judged by their own imperfect attempts. And so this explains both humans' moral responsibility, that we're held accountable. It also explains human inability, that we can't meet the standard. And so it creates the need for the covenant of divine grace while maintaining the importance of righteous living. Because as we receive that grace, we begin to live out differently. Okay. But we're still not based on our living anymore. We're based on that covenant of Jesus' grace. Okay. So there's a big section in there. It's also ties into justification, how guilty people get right with God. How can a sinner be declared righteous before a holy God? It's only through God stepping in. And the reason this was a big talking point alongside covenant theology is because the Catholic system would often make it seem as though it wasn't just faith, it also required works and sacraments for salvation. And for the Reformers, the Westminster Divines, they viewed this as justification, being made right with God, being partially dependent on human contribution and human performance. And their understanding of Scripture said, no, it cannot be at all based on human performance, human contribution, because if it is, our contribution is always imperfect. It never measures up.
It makes me think of the covenant between Abraham and God.
Yes. Abraham
literally could not make that, like, he could not contribute to that covenant. So God was like, go and to sleep. I will walk this path of this covenant to these animals cut in half, whatever. And I'm actually, God saying, I'm actually the one upholding this covenant. It has nothing to do with you, Abraham.
Precisely.
So.
Yes, and that is the Old Testament proof of what New Testament theology screams. Right. That's one of those proofs where it can often feel like the law creates a work-based system, and then the New Testament creates something completely different and totally new. It's like, no. This has been the thing the whole time. Abraham is before the law. Yeah.
They could never hold the covenant, but God always covered for them.
Yes, precisely. And so it was through faith alone, through Christ alone.
They were adopted.
That they were adopted into this family, that they are entered into this covenant of grace. Yes, and so That's why that was such an important part there, because this is still a very comforting thought for people who are wondering if they're going to be good enough. The answer is no. Instead, we get to look to Christ's perfect righteousness rather than our imperfect human efforts, and we get to trust in his goodness instead of what we can't bring to the table. Mm-hmm. All right, so the next section we'll talk about is predestination. How fun.
Whoop, whoop.
I know, right? So this is God's sovereign choice. Now, this was a very controversial doctrine in the putting together of the Westminster Confession, and it remains a very controversial doctrine in every other day that has ever existed. Basically, it's that the idea is that before creation, God chose specific people for salvation based on his will, not foreseen faith. So that's one of the key things when it comes to predestination, is some people will try to semantic it and go, well, God knew who would come to faith, and so yes, he gave grace to them even beforehand. And those who would hold to this and most staunchly would say absolutely not. God simply chose and gave them faith. And so this is emphasizing that God has complete control, and it eliminates human boasting about spiritual achievements. Because basically the logic is, if salvation depends entirely on God's grace, then God must decide who receives it. Any human contribution undermines the gospel by making grace dependent on human cooperation. Thoughts and feelings?
So the Westminster Confession holds this belief that God chose specific people he gave them their faith.
Yes. Your faith came, I'm going to misquote Paul now. I can't remember it. But faith is not of your own, basically.
Yeah, so saying, again, back to the whole no human contribution.
Yep.
Sometimes I can be like, okay, yeah, I can sit with that. And then sometimes I'm like, wait, free will?
Mm-hmm.
Right? So.
Mm-hmm. As Charles Spurgeon would say, when asked the question, how do you reconcile God's sovereignty and free will? His response was, you don't need to reconcile, good friends. They just exist together.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the answer I've often heard. That is highly lacking. It sounds cool in the moment, but doesn't actually answer anything.
No, it doesn't.
But
yes.
Okay. It's a tension that exists of whether or not that is a thing, but that is what the Westminster Confession holds to. Okay. It would use slightly different language than the way we've said it in this moment, but yeah. Okay. And it's meant to be a comfort to believers by grounding salvation in God's unchangeable love rather than our changeable performance. And it's meant to provide ultimate security based on divine faithfulness, not human inconsistency. And so that's what it's meant to do. Now, can it do the adverse or the reverse, the other side of? Yeah. I think it can also, yes. Let me rephrase that. It absolutely can.
Wait, what are you saying?
It can also be a lack of comfort. It can be a huge sticking point with people believing in this God who would choose and not choose and all the things.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yes.
No, I definitely see that.
But as again, we're talking about their document and their thing.
Right. Yeah.
So this was what they came to a majority agreement on.
Okay.
For them. Yeah.
They smarter than me too, so.
Sometimes. They did also spend some time talking about perseverance of the saints, aka once saved, always saved.
Why is it called perseverance of the saints?
That is a phrase from Scripture.
Oh.
It's in the New Testament.
Okay. Like it sounded familiar, but I was trying to, okay.
Yeah, and so that's kind of what the theological phrasing of it is, the perseverance of the saints. It's one of Paul's letters.
Okay.
Uses that phrase at least, if not more than one.
Once saved, always saved, okay.
But yeah, essentially, true believers cannot lose salvation because it depends on God's unchangeable choice and not their changeable behavior.
Yes.
For Catholic teaching, it was that no mortal sin can destroy justification, that salvation is permanent, not temporary, which was the opposite of what Catholic teaching would often hold to, where they would basically say, like, if you are away from the things of faith and the sacraments and the Mass and all of that, and you're never living or you're never going to confession, that what you may have once had, you could no longer have. You would need to get right again, basically.
Yeah, which is back to human contribution.
Yep.
Okay.
And
wow.
So, to their credit, they follow this logic through the entire document.
Yeah, they do.
They don't hold it in inconsistencies, which is what I often do with it, if I'm just being real.
Yeah.
Like, there are spots where I'm like this, and then there are spots where I'm like that, because it feels more comfy. They did not do that. They held the logic through and through. Yeah.
I like it. Okay.
So they did a good job with that. They spent a lot of time talking about church governance, like we said. Where they ultimately landed was on a Presbyterian system of basically democracy with accountability.
Okay.
Their biblical reasoning is essentially that the New Testament shows a lot of elders working together rather than single bishops ruling independently. And so they found the patterns of collective decision-making throughout apostolic writings, especially Paul's, and church organization instructions. Yeah, and so they also were basically living that out in the way they were putting this together of, like, how does this work? Yeah, we've got some hierarchy but in here, but also this is all of us working together. And so they were living it in the moments as well. And so, yeah, basically pastors would answer to presbyteries, and local churches would participate in regional decisions, and broader assemblies would intervene when they were needed. And so this balanced a lot of local freedom with still having denominational accountability and doctrinal consistency. Your Presbyterian churches, to be a pastor, I think in both the Presbyterian, I forget their exact one, there's Presbyterian USA and Presbyterians or Presbyterian of America. Anyway, it doesn't matter. There's two of them, two dominant ones in the U.S., and they both require a lot of understanding of essentially the Westminster Confession and the doctrines there before you can be voted in as a pastor. So that they hold doctrinal consistency. And if you begin teaching outside of those things, you get called out for it.
Yeah.
Which I find good.
Yeah.
Yeah. They spent some time talking against the Episcopal system and how they felt that it was very politically vulnerable, because if your bishops are being appointed by your monarchs, who are also technically the head of the church, then your bishops are more entitled or more influenced by their politics, possibly, than they are of their religion. So that was their biggest issue there. With congregational independence, they had a lot of concerns of, will churches be able to still be united, and will there be any accountability for people who are teaching bad doctrine, basically. They also had a lot of time to spend talking about church and state relations. They did view government as a divine institution. They felt that there was God had given God-ordained civil authorities for justice and protection, but they did feel that that should have limited religious role, that basically government should protect church freedom without controlling any of its doctrine or interfering in spiritual matters. And so that was also a very direct slap in the face, not only of the English system, but definitely the Catholic system that existed at that time, where they were basically saying the Pope should have no authority over any civil rulers. Governments don't need churches' permissions for legitimate functions. So the opposite being true as well. Government shouldn't be ruling over churches, but churches shouldn't be ruling over government. They felt that both were true.
Okay.
And so there were some Protestant denominations essentially at this time that felt that theocracies, where governments are run by the church, should be a thing. The Westminster Confession said absolutely not. Church is its thing, government's its thing. And this is what really heavily popularized the separation of church and state. This document did it. Augsburg.
I was wondering about that recently.
Yeah. Augsburg leaned
start?
into it for sure, but the
Yeah.
Westminster is the one that really solidified it.
What's their biggest reason? So
what's their reasoning that the church shouldn't lean into government?
Yeah.
That direction. I think it's the lack of biblical evidence for it. Where, I mean, if you look through the New Testament, at no point do you see them trying to lean
infiltrate
into
the Roman Empire or whatever.
They're not trying to get into levels of government to then go, okay, we're going to create laws based on our beliefs. Instead, they're just living out their beliefs. They're attempting to follow the laws as long as the laws don't go against their beliefs, as long as they aren't sins.
You're so right.
So that is where the idea of church and state comes from.
Okay.
For the Westminster Confession especially,
right,
is the fact that there's no biblical reasoning for it. Now, you could point back to like a King David, but he is an exception. And his exception is rough too. Like the kings in the Old Testament, more were not good than were good in the ways that they attempted to tie religion and government together.
Well, and that was kind of like God being like, I told you.
Yeah, no, 100%.
I was trying to tell y'all we didn't need to do kings, but y'all want to do it, so here we go.
Yep. And he specifically gives a list of things that kings will attempt to do. And in the early chapters of Solomon's life, as far as him being king, there's actually a really subtle list where he does the exact things, negative things, that God warns them about. And it's if you just read it on face value, it's like, oh man, look at all these cool things Solomon is doing. But if you're someone who has read that interaction back with Samuel, I think it even goes all the way back into some of like Deuteronomy and Numbers, where Moses is saying things on God's behalf because God knew he was going to have kings eventually. Some of that same list is also there as well. And so you only pick up those things with Solomon if you've read your previous Old Testament books thoroughly. Yeah. Anyway.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. So church and government separation. You can thank the Westminster Confession for highly popularizing it.
Okay.
Again, not their idea, but they made it a big deal. They also spent plenty of time talking about the worship and sacraments. These are very similar to things we talked about in the Lutheran documents, where it's got to be in Scripture for it to be a thing we do in worship. So let's stop doing all this crazy extra tradition stuff that y'all started. Let's just keep it simple. We're basically going to teach Scripture, we're going to pray, we're going to sing some psalms, and we'll do the sacraments. And speaking of sacraments, there are only two that Christ clearly commands, and that is baptism and communion. And again, we talked about those in the Lutheran one. The Westminster does hold to infant believers being baptized if their families are converts, believers. And so if the adults are believers, then infants can be, as a sign of community membership. And so for them, it reflects a covenant structure, including children, while still requiring personal faith as they grow for communion, community participation once they're older. Basically. So like, hey, if you want to continue to be a part of this, you do also need to confess this faith, but they're not going to baptize them again. They hold that their baptism as a child was sufficient, because things go in all the directions.
That's interesting. I like it.
Yeah. You like infant baptism?
No, I just like
you like the reasoning?
I'm liking getting this background that I've never had before.
Okay. Fair enough. Gotcha. Yes.
Infant baptism. I mean, that was it's fair. Like,
yeah.
reasoning.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not here to debate or talk about that.
Yeah.
I just overall, this has been super interesting. I want to go read the Westminster Confession.
Fair. So a lot of Presbyterian pastors, elders, things of that nature, look at us as Baptists and go, hey, you guys are really hung up that we baptize infants and that we don't then do a baptism once they are have confessed faith for themselves. Said, but you guys will baptize the same person 5 times at 5 different churches. Said, so which one of us is treating it more lightly? And basically, it would be their questioning. I've listened to a debate between a Baptist and a Presbyterian minister once time, and that was their part of the conversation.
I definitely can see that for sure.
And so, I'm not saying I'm pro it. As a matter of fact, I'm not pro infant baptism. But nonetheless, I understand the argument and can respect it.
Well, I mean, in the Bible, maybe this is where their references.
Yeah.
They say go and baptize your whole family.
Yeah. But it didn't necessarily say that, but it does happen in the lives of people like the jailer in Acts, whatever, with Paul and Silas, or was that Peter? I don't know. I can't remember.
It was Paul, right?
It was Paul.
That was Paul?
Yeah, I think it was. The jailer there. It's like Acts something. I don't know. I'm trying to remember references I can at this moment.
I'd like to see the references.
But yeah,
on the infant baptism.
He takes them home, and then they baptize his whole family after he comes to faith. It doesn't necessarily say the entire family does. Now,
that's what I'm saying.
They do share with the family, but yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, I'm curious to see the references on that.
They also talk about communion for Catholics. There's transubstantiation, where it literally becomes Jesus' body. And Westminster's like, no. It's not. That's not where your faith comes through, this taking of God's physical body or Jesus' physical body. Instead, it emphasizes that this is through faith. And so you're taking communion. And I can't remember for them if they still feel that it does become God's body or Jesus's body and blood in the process of taking communion or not. There's 3 different views. It's transubstantiation, consubstantiation, and I never remember the name of the third one.
Okay.
And I think consubstantiation, I'm pulling this out of thin air a little bit. If I'm not mistaken, that's the one where it still sort of becomes Jesus's body, but sort of not. And then the third one that I can never remember the name of, I believe, is the one where it's like, nah, this is all just symbolic, guys. Calm down. Which is what most Protestants today would more hold to. But yeah. They also spend a little bit of time talking about the Sabbath, when we'll observe Sunday church gatherings. They say it should be Sunday. Sunday is our day of worship because that's the day Jesus returned on, instead of it being on Saturday as the last day of the week, which is where Jewish tradition had the Sabbath landing. And they do also say that it should be a comprehensive observation, that the entire day is for worship and rest and mercy rather than just church attendance, because they feel that would then honor God while providing plenty of necessary physical and spiritual refreshment for individuals and also for society.
Okay, so I don't get the whole point of changing the day from what the Jews were doing.
So that it already happened, they're more confirming that it should be. They didn't change it.
But does it matter?
It was a conversation piece.
Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out why that
was the Sabbath itself in Scripture is the 7th day, and the 7th day in the Gregorian calendar is Saturday. But Sunday is the day after the 7th day, so it's really the first day. There's a larger conversation there where it's technically the seventh day and all the things. It's a whole other thing.
Okay,
but anyway, but so a lot of even in the time of the writing of the New Testament, a lot of believers had began gathering on Sunday instead of on Saturday.
Yeah.
Some of that was just practical, like they needed to separate themselves from the Jewish communities a little bit, and other parts of it were theological, because that was the day Jesus was resurrected on. The more important part in that conversation, to me, the more important part of this conversation is the fact that the entire day should be treated as a Sabbath instead of just attending church.
Right.
That was a big deal it was also in the Augsburg Confession. I don't think we talked about it in that one, but it was in there as well, that the entire day should be a Sabbath day instead of just going to church. Yeah. So, I think that's all we're going to hit from the confession itself.
Okay.
Any other thoughts or anything from you?
No.
Okay. Cool. Well, let's take a little ad breather, and then we'll talk about what happened after. Virginia's a homeschool mom to 4 kids, which means she's constantly working, but only a few hours a week are actually hours she gets paid for. I work as a pastor, so everything in our life is on a budget. Yet all the people and the dogs and everybody who lives in our house seems to want to eat every day, multiple times a day. That means we're looking for every opportunity to cut monthly costs, and our cell phone bill is one of those costs that we were able to cut. We switched to Mint Mobile over a year ago, and we haven't looked back. I won't name the big name cell phone carrier we were with, but I'll say that we were spending $90 for just 1 month for 2 phone lines. Now we're spending $90 every 3 months for our 2 phone lines. In other words, that means we're just spending $15 a month for each of our phones. That's call, that's text, that's data for just $15 a month. And we really never run over the data limit unless we're out on some kind of big family traveling trip. And when that happens, you can actually choose to purchase more data in real time if you don't want to work with the slower speeds. When you switch, because you should, you can keep your existing phone number and your phone just like we did. So listen, you can spend $500 a year plus on a phone line with a big name carrier because all the big name prices are about the same, or you can spend just $180 a year for a phone line with Mint Mobile. So go ahead and check out the show notes for our affiliate link, which is the link you need to start saving money on your cell phone today. All right, so the aftermath. So obviously they started this whole process in 43, and they don't adopt the confession officially until 48, but Charles is doing stuff because they're in the middle of a civil war. Right. So Charles I, they're having battles and all this stuff, but actually in 1646, after a defeat and technically the end of the First English Civil War, Charles got captured. So he gets defeated in a battle. He flees, goes to Scotland basically, and then he gets cornered by a Scottish army, and they end up capturing him because he has to surrender and he doesn't want to get killed. And eventually the Scots hand him over to the English Parliament in early 47. But he doesn't stay there. He actually escapes house arrest at the Hampton Court where they were keeping him, and so he makes it over to the Isles of Wight, and so he's there, and he kind of starts the Second Civil War of the English nation, and so he's there, but he loses again. Another parliamentary force rolls in and defeats him, and he's formally imprisoned instead of being put in house arrest in the Carisbrooke Castle on the Isle of Wight, where he was. And so, actually, this is where the Second English Civil War fully starts. His supporters rise up after his second capture, and they go to war against the Parliament, basically, and they just get straight up routed and defeated, and so they're completely defeated. And what happens is, because Civil War has now ended, Parliament's army fully defeats him after all of these years of bloody fights, and so now they have a question on their hands. What do we do with our king that we have imprisoned? Because he's our king, but he's in prison.
Yeah.
And we're running this thing right now. And so the traditional solution to something like this would be to negotiate with him and ultimately restore this person as king, probably somewhat as a puppet king, but still restore them as king, and the monarchy would continue through their family line. But Charles had just broken so many agreements over the years, so many attempts at them making peace with him, that they didn't trust him to do it anymore.
Right.
And so they take and put him on trial for treason and ultimately find him guilty, and they behead him publicly. And so it horrified all of Europe, because this is unprecedented. Like, you don't kill kings when you're just some parliamentary little representative government, whatever.
Yeah.
He's the king. We have convinced people for centuries here in Europe that the king has been appointed by God to be king of this people, and you just killed him. And so, man, it rocked the world. And it also created the Commonwealth. Ooh. And so this Commonwealth England becomes a republic called the Commonwealth of England. It meant that the power belonged to the common people rather than to any monarch. And so in practice, it meant that Parliament and the army controlled the nation without any royal authority. And so these elected representatives theoretically were supposed to be governing the people for their benefit rather than royal pleasure. And so this was a radical experiment in an age when virtually every European nation had kings or emperors. And so Oliver Cromwell, I mentioned that name earlier as one of the key leaders of the Parliamentarian Roundheads.
I thought it was Thomas.
No, that's Thomas Cranmer.
Oh,
that was the reformer under James I.
Mm-hmm.
It is easy to confuse them. I often do in my brain. Anyway, so he's one of the key generals, and he ultimately takes control of everything that's going on as they're setting up this civil government. And it turns out the civilian government was really ineffective, and so they had beheaded Charles in 60, they beheaded him in 49. Looking at the wrong part of my document. And by 53, so just 4 years later, the government was just ineffective, and Cromwell dismisses them and decides he'll rule as Lord Protector. Definitely not a king, right?
That's funny.
No. Instead, he's a military dictator.
Okay.
And he refused the crown. And so he actually had some religious tolerance policies that a lot of these different Presbyterian, Congregationalists, Baptists, Quakers, they were able to coexist peacefully, which really actually disappointed a lot of the Presbyterians, because they were like, we thought we were finally going to make everyone one of us. But it didn't happen. And his desire for religious freedom meant that the Westminster Confession just became an option rather than the national standard. But it continued to carry a lot of influence despite having official status, and a lot of people would turn to it as, even if you weren't going to hold to it fully, especially the Presbyterian church governance, you still would look to it as a source of good theology, basically. And it did that really well. Cromwell died in 58, so he made himself Lord Protector back in 53, and then dies by 58. His son, Richard, was not able to maintain control. The Commonwealth government really fell apart, and so because of that, there was just, it had never found any strong, sound foundation any kind of republic had. They had never created any real representative government. And so the nation was just exhausted. They've had now at this point basically 20 years of civil war, republic, military rule, and all the things, and everybody just wanted stability. They're like, we're tired of it, we're over it, give us some normalcy. So because this radical experiment failed, they reach out to Charles II, the son of Charles I.
Okay.
And they restore the monarchy after 11 years of it not existing.
I never knew that.
Charles II was determined to actually restore religious uniformity under the Episcopal authority, because he viewed religious diversity as dangerous, just like all the other kings had. And so basically Charles brings back bishops, the Book of Common Prayer, and he pretty much reverses 20 years of Puritan religious development. He restores the monarchy, and the Puritanism is just kicked out, and they're gone. And so the Anglican Church basically goes back to what it was before all the chaos started.
Wow.
It basically goes back to what it was under King James.
The Westminster and all that was for nothing at this point.
For the English government, yes, it was for nothing.
Yeah.
So
it was Ireland. I guess that was, who is that?
Scotland.
Scotland, yeah.
Yes. So basically conformity is required literally under a law. About 2,000 Puritan ministers refused to hold to the Book of Common Prayer and all this new conformity, and so they get kicked out of their churches. Many of them were Westminster Assembly participants. Like, of those 2,000, that 121, if they were alive, they were probably in that 2,000 number. Like, they were people who were part of it. Westminster gets fully outlawed, and so what happens is all the Presbyterian and Congregationalist churches, they may continue to use the Westminster documents despite there being legal penalties, but they had to do it very quietly, and they have to stay off the radar. But over in Scotland, it was adopted back in 47, and it held through all the upheaval. The Westminster Confession actually remains Scotland's standard through all of Cromwell's occupation, through the restoration of the monarchy and all the subsequent changes. So unlike England's reversals, Scotland maintained commitment to the Presbyterian principles regardless of the political circumstances. And it actually continues into the modern day Church of Scotland. It still officially subscribes to the Westminster Confession as being the standard, only subordinate to Scripture and, of course, God himself. And so it is the direct connection all the way back to the Westminster Confession. But it's not the only one. Pretty much any of your Presbyterian churches are going to hold to the Westminster Confession, and a lot of your Baptist churches, outside of a few things like infant baptism, and they can go either way on predestination. Outside of those two, just about everything else of the Westminster Confession, most of your typical Baptist churches would hold to it. Now, I think it is pretty well accepted that maybe Westminster had some unrealistic expectations of unity happening across all these different desires for church governance. And it also had some unrealistic expectations of how much politics was actually going to remain entangled in religion. Even today, we try to claim it's not, but I look at our political parties, and it very much is entangled. There are many politicians. It's quite popular at this current moment to entangle religion with our politics. And so Westminster just... They had unrealistic expectations of unity and unrealistic expectations of how much religion and politics just do overlap. Even though there's not necessarily a biblical, hey, they were trying to be in government, all the things, nonetheless, there's a ton of overlap in the Bible. Yeah. And that you can see that as we had our discussion on some of the kings in Old Testament and things of that nature. So yeah, we just have to be realistic sometimes of how the world's going to work. But I do appreciate their idealism in both of those, nonetheless. Yeah. And yeah, so it continued on and is, again, one of the most important Christian documents of all time. Yeah. Period. Westminster Confession. We'll actually talk about the Westminster Catechism that was developed at this same time, or along these same lines. Pretty sure it was at the same time as all of this was happening as well. So basically, this document kind of reminds us that there are fundamental questions about God, like salvation, Scripture, Christian living, and they do require serious answers in every generation. And thankfully, the Westminster Confession gives us a lot of framework that we can work for. I mean, for now, almost 4 centuries, it has given us a lot of comprehensive biblical and carefully thought out statements that, whether or not you fully agree with them, you can't argue that their logic and the way they got there was not well thought out, and that they can't support themselves.
Right.
So you then have to go, okay, if I don't agree with this statement, if I don't agree with predestination or infant baptism, I have to come ready to really have a full discussion about this. If I'm just going to look at it and go, I don't agree, and then it's going to go, okay, why? And you now have to answer that, because it's got an answer for why.
I mean, it does. Yeah, if you're arguing.
Yes, if you're having a conversation about it, obviously. But it comes prepared to give its side of the conversation. I also appreciate that despite the fact that there was a lot of outside tension trying to compel the divines, the Westminster Assembly, to do certain things, there's a lot of pressure from the outside to go fast, to have certain types of things that would be politically convenient, this, that, and the other, that the divines, the assembly, whatever you want to call them, divines feels weird, that they were willing to go a little slow, to seek unity, and to give a lot of thought, not for short-term convenience, but for long-term faithfulness and long-term impact, ultimately. And I appreciate that about this one. There are many times in church world where we come with conclusions that aren't anti-biblical, that aren't faithful representations of Jesus, nothing like that. But at the same time, we just get there really quickly because we need an answer for this moment. And I've certainly been guilty of that myself. And so I appreciate just the depth that they went. Yeah.
It's true. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Any thoughts after all that?
That was a lot.
I brought you through a lot. It was hard to succinct it down any further without just hitting literally the document itself.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
I feel like I have to chew on it for a minute.
As you should. These episodes have definitely not been ones to listen on 2 times speed.
Gracious, and not even listen to in one sitting.
Possibly. On that.
I am struggling.
Yep.
But no, I what you said I think is accurate. Going all the way back to like why you believe what you believe, and I think these days we are more quick to have an answer, or we don't have any depth to our faith and our beliefs. We just,
depth in the sense of being able to articulate it well, kind of things. Yeah.
Yeah. Or even say like, this is why I believe this or that.
Yeah.
Show me in the Bible where you can back that up. Well,
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's good. Well, thank you guys for hanging out with us on this episode about the Westminster Confession. If you made it all the way to the end, thanks.
Yeah. Wow.
Thanks for being here with us for sure. Man, share this out with some of your friends who you think might be able to benefit from some church history and also some theological knowledge. And yeah, all the other things we typically tell you to do. Head to our website, bowlsoflife.com, and you'll find all the resources we've mentioned and things of that nature. I don't know. I'm blanking on my outro right now.
Yeah, well, I would say we'd like to hear from you guys what your thoughts are. Questions you have, or arguments you have, or debate points you have, not because we're going to debate, but just to see like what people are thinking as they listen.
Yes, that's fair.
So for sure, send us an email or write a comment.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks. Thanks for salvaging that one for me, Virginia. And thank you guys for hanging out with us on this podcasting journey. We'll see you again soon.